welcome to Creating Surface 2. I'm Allison Watt. This video is the second in a series that I'm doing for Artwork Art Play, and I created these short lives because I wanted to talk about how we use certain techniques in acrylic paint to create interesting surfaces. So acrylic paint tends to be kind of flat, so it's really important to be resourceful in using the paint, and it is very versatile, acrylic, so we can explore all kinds of different ways to make beautiful surfaces. And last week I did some mark making and transferring with wax paper. Today I'm going to look at glazing. Alright, so I am going to switch my camera around, but before that I want to just review again what I use glazing for. So glazing is a thin layer of paint. So we can thin down heavy body paint with a medium or with water to make it thin and a glazing kind of medium. So glazing is really a very thin layer of paint. So when we put it down, we can see what's underneath it. You can also use fluid paint, or I like to use inks for just a very quick, intense glaze. Also very transparent. I'm going to be showing you a few of these things this morning. So the things that I use glazing for are to unify an area. Maybe there's a lot of activity and we just want to take maybe the first step towards calming it down. So I might throw a glaze over a portion of the painting. Sometimes I glaze the whole painting. If it looks like I've got not enough unity of palette, then I'll just put a glaze over the whole thing. I like to use quinacridone gold for that, or an ink like something dramatic like flame orange. It's a brave move, but it can really be rewarding. I also use glazes to create depth, and you know, what we're doing then is creating several layers of thin paint, and that kind of creates a luminous surface. I also use glazing colors to amend underlying colors. So let's get started on doing I'll do some demo work. So in this piece I've created something that's a little bit like my pond painting. That is, if you look on my website, I have in my gallery several water paintings, and I used this building up luminous layers to create the effect of water. So with this one, I actually started this one in Creating Light demo last spring, and that's actually a YouTube video on my channel, Creating Light. So you might want to take a look at that. So I created some glazed surfaces. There's several layers in the underpainting, and then I put some just flat titanium white by transferring from wax paper onto here, and then I've just applied a little bit more to make the point that you can build these up in layers. So this is opaque. It's not a glazing color, titanium white. It is our most opaque color. Now, if we use glazing to build up luminosity, and you know, using these thin layers of paint, it doesn't mean that the whole painting has to be made with transparent layers. As always, we're looking for interesting ways to build contrast into our paintings, and sort of flat, opaque areas as well as luminous areas can work really well together. So I'm going to put down some of the colors that I typically use for glazing in these paintings. I'll use fluid because they're pretty fast, but I could pull out some, put down some heavy body paint and thin it out too. So you don't have to buy fluid. I like to have a selection of different kinds of paint. So this is phthalo green blue shade, and this is phthalo blue. So the phthalos are really beautiful and transparent. I'm just going to take you through a couple of steps on this painting, sort of show you how typically I would approach this. I'm going to use a flat. I've got a little bit of water, even though this is a fluid formula, so I don't really need water, and it's pretty thin, but I always like to be careful, not take the big steps right away, just kind of ease into these luminous layers. So this is a painting that had lilies in it, water lilies, so I've kind of remade the water lilies by putting down some white to kind of create their forms, and then I glazed it over this morning with green gold, which is a really beautiful glazing color. So I'm just going to lay down a layer. Let me get a softer brush here. A layer of blue, and you can see I'm creating. We can still see what's underneath it, but I'm creating a little bit more form because I'm cutting around these forms that I recreated by putting on the white to create the lily pad forms. So this would be just one of many layers. These I put in this morning. They're obviously the reeds that come out of the water. I'm going to pull a little bit back here too. Taking a little while for the paint to actually absorb into the underpainting. Just moving it around a bit as it dries. So there's our first layer of glaze. Now up in here, in my original painting that I'm sort of using this as the idea for that painting, is an area where light was kind of pouring through from the back. And what I did with these areas is I kind of rubbed them with warm colors. Quinacridone gold is one of my favorite ones to use. So you can put down glazing colors with a brush, like using a palette, like I did, or you can just put them right onto the page, or your paper, or your canvas. All of these techniques also translate to canvas work, of course. And then I like to rub. So already that's kind of, yeah, just looking at my screen here. It's already moved from that really, really harsh white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this aside and let it dry. Maybe I'll come back to it at the end of the demo here. I don't want to take time right now and use the blow dryer with this because we have some other things to look at. So just to review, this is using glazes as a way of creating luminosity in the sense of depth on your surface. And what I will do next with this is sort of introduce maybe some more paint onto these lily pads, create another layer back here. This is turned green because there's a lot of yellow under it. So even though I used blue with it, it's turned green. So we're optical mixing. We're mixing the color right on the surface with thin layers. So I'll set that aside and let's look at something else. All right. This is a kind of crazy landscape. I made this in a class that I gave last year on abstracting landscape. And we did a bunch of different things here. I was just using two colors, ochre and dioxazine purple. So I applied a paint with a credit card, pulling the paint across the paper. It's watercolor paper. I'm not even sure it was gessoed. I think it was gessoed. Yeah, that looks gessoed under there. And then I made some collage papers on white tissue paper with mark making and ripped them up and laid them on the surface. And it's looking very flat right now, of course. But I'm going to just show you how I can maybe start to pull apart layers of the landscape by glazing different parts differently. So let's have a look at an ink maybe. here is Flame Orange. I love this color. I'm actually going to drop it right onto the purple. I'm not sure what's going to happen. We'll see. And again, with clear water, I'm going to just pull that across. So you can see that the orange has neutralized the purple. I mean, dioxazine is a little bit much, right? And so is Flame Orange. But together, they work almost like complements because the Flame Orange is so yellow that it works like a complement with the purple. And all of a sudden, we've got a brown layer there. And what else could we do pulling apart? Antelope Brown is another color of ink that I really love. This one's almost done, so I'm going to actually have to try to dig out some ink with a brush. See if I can get some in here. All right, so this layer here, I'm going to put Antelope Brown over. So already it's kind of starting to pull apart a little bit. I'm going to leave this white line just because it's kind of interesting. And again, I'm going to do a little bit of rubbing here. See what happens when we do that. Okay, so that looks a little bit like it might have some sense of layering and disappearing into the background, but we need to push this one back now. So I'm going to get a cobalt blue. I'm going to have to grab that from my blue here. This cobalt blue. Cobalt blue is a really great kind of neutral blue. It's neither very warm nor very cool. So I'm going to use that. It's great for landscape, just to kind of push a layer back. So here's an example of where I'm going to make a glazing color with a heavy body paint. So I'm just going to add some water to it. And remember, we want it thin, so I'm thinning it down. And now I'm going to lay it on this layer here to push this back. I've expanded the palette now, of course. It was very unified before. It was just, as I said, ochre and purple. But I think I'll actually go right back to here and tone down that purple a little bit. And then this landscape would get some more, it would get some more treatment, like some more, I'd come in and work with opaques, you know, to really pull apart these layers of landscape. Come in and build an opaque color in the sky and add lots more mark making. I like to use some of my crazy mark making brushes made of ropes and twigs and things like that to create maybe some grasses and vegetation. So, but what I really wanted to just show you is how you can use glazing to really quickly pull layers apart. I want to show you how I use glazing and also drawing gum to sometimes unify areas in a painting, a work in progress that seems a little bit too active. And also sometimes with failed paintings, I'll just throw some drawing gum on and put a new layer of thin paint over top and see where that takes me. I really like the element of surprise it creates. So this is the drawing gum I'm using. It's my favorite, PBO drawing gum. I'm just going to put some, without thinking too hard about it, on the painting. So this is an active surface I created with scribbles and different layers of paint, including some titanium white. And I'm kind of looking at the visual language. There's lines, a bit of a scribbly kind of language, but really there's not a lot emerging yet because it's just in its very first layers. And I'm leaving areas blank because those are the areas that will then get covered with the glaze that I put over top, and anything where there's drawing gum will be protected. So I'm going to take a look at this one, which I've already prepared with drawing gum. It takes a few minutes for the drawing gum to dry. So now I think I will use an ink on this one. I really like marine blue, and it's nice and dark, so we should be able to get some coverage without losing what's underneath. So I put some strokes of, again with kind of a flat brush, of drawing gum on here, and it should cover what's underneath, and everything that's exposed will absorb the glaze. So I'm just going to put the ink on right out of the bottle. This is FW acrylic ink. It's really intense and really transparent. The palette that I was using underneath was alizarin crimson, green gold, and cobalt blue. And there was a little bit of French ultramarine in there too. So let's see what happens. I'm going to pick up a little bit of ink here just to create a little bit of variety in the intensity. And I'll give it a quick dry. And the marine blue ink is now dry. Now I can remove that drawing gum with my fingers. It's good to try it with your fingers because you can feel it. You don't want to leave any on there. You can also get one of these crepe lifting erasers at the art stores, and that will do the trick for you too. Often what I'll do is I'll do a first pass with this. And then I'll go over it with my fingers to just make sure that I got it all off. So it's taken the piece to another place now. It's a little quieter than it was. It still doesn't feel completely unified, but I could go in and do some glazing as well, maybe to pull some areas together. I'll go back to the maybe the alizarin crimson. Here's the alizarin crimson. It was part of the original palette. So it's a fluid formula. So I'll just pull that out on the parchment palette that I'm using here, just parchment paper. Maybe use a flat brush because I'm really trying to aim for some simplicity rather than more detail here. And just start glazing some areas together. I tend to use these kind of sweeping brush strokes, so often my visual language does have these kinds of sweeps in it. And I'm following a little bit the lead of some of the lines in my glazing, or my drawing gum protection. So kind of following along these edges here. A little bit more paint. So that's an example of glazing with drawing gum underneath and then reglazing after lifting the drawing gum to try to create new areas that you might want to pull together into blocks eventually with heavier paint, other layers of transparent glazes to create darker values. So this is just one step along the way, and it's a tool that you can use. So with this one here, I was going to show you how you can create form with, or support some of the form that you have with glazing. So for instance here, I could take some blue glaze go back to my, actually maybe I'll use a little bit of one of these other colors, which I took out the green here, phthalo green. And I'm just going to support this shape here. Drop this down a little. This was from a demo I did last year, and it was starting out with contour drawings of plant material, abstracting botanicals. So that sort of helped to bring the form forward. And then I'll go back to my blue, or maybe I'll get a different color too. A beautiful one is quinacridone magenta, also very transparent. That's a great one for glazing. That will be nice on here because that's a green, so we'll get a bit of neutrals created with that. And again, this is a fluid formula. Oops, got to get the top off. It's a brand new one. Okay. So there's the quinacridone magenta. And I did have some plant forms in here. I'm just going to kind of pick them out, make them up. These were seed pods, I think. We started with these fun contour drawings. But what's great about glazing is that you get the paint interacting differently with different things in the undersurface. So with the green, over the green it turns the green neutral. Over the white it turns it just white, or pink rather. And there's some little bit of yellow in here that's turning a bit orange. So that's, I guess you'd call that glazing to find or support form. And that would be just one step along the way. So I'm going to go back to that first one that I was working on. It's going to need a little bit of drying. So just excuse me for a moment because I do want to show you another couple of layers in here. So I'm going to go back to looking for just the right brush here. Going back to my blue now, phthalo blue. And let's just do a glaze over the whole thing. Let's do a very thin glaze. This is when things really start to get interesting, when you get 2 or 3 layers down. I'll glaze this too. So this technique really lends itself to certain subjects like water, where you get a lot of the sense of layers already. So maybe I'll just pick up a little bit of the light in some of those lily pads, just to create a little bit of difference here and there. And up here, maybe get even a warmer yellow. I'll use a little bit of a cadmium yellow, and I'll just thin it out and rub it in. And I can always add more sort of fragments of light to this by adding cadmium, or adding more titanium white too. I'm going to try to blend it in here to the background. I love these big flat brushes. They're great for these kind of thin layers of paint. And rub some areas away to create a sense of light flickering. So the next layer of this would be to I would dry this and then add another layer of glazing, probably, surprisingly enough, in places quinacridone magenta, because it will start to neutralize the green underneath because it's the complement. So I hope that that gives you some ideas for using glazing in your own work. And just to kind of summarize again, it's great for creating luminous layers, for unifying areas, and finding form out of a very complex and active surface, and pulling apart layers by like amending underlying colors deliberately, for instance in a landscape, making the closer layers more intense and warmer, and the off layers kind of blue. So have fun with this, and be sure to pop any questions down in the comments. I'll get to them soon.